Wait, you're Rachel Monroe. I thought you just did admin work or something. Vanessa says it loud enough for half the reception to hear. She's smiling gracefully, cruelly, like someone who's just spotted a fly in her champagne. I don't answer. I just hold my glass a little tighter and feel the blood rush to my ears. We're standing in the ballroom of the Ridgeway Vineyard ceiling, strung with gold lights, fake laughter echoing off walls painted in privilege. I haven't seen Vanessa in years, but somehow she still knows how to peel my skin back in public. She's my cousin, maid of honor, family golden girl, and for most of my life she's acted like I'm invisible. But tonight, someone else is here. And the moment he steps forward, the governor himself, and lays his hand on my shoulder, everything about this room changes. His voice is calm but final. She doesn't just do admin work, she runs my office. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. I'm the daughter of a public school teacher and a night shift nurse, and I serve as chief of staff to the governor of Ohio. But apparently, none of that mattered when I stood in a satin dress with a glass of ginger ale in my hand, overhearing my own cousin sneer across a room full of relatives. Honestly, no one even knows what Rachel does. She's basically a glorified secretary. That line didn't come from a stranger. It came from Vanessa, my first cousin, the bride's older sister. The one who used to win every Easter egg hunt because she was taller, faster, and made sure I knew it. The one my mother always compared me to, even when she tried not to. Vanessa in her sparkling champagne gown with her voice just loud enough to be overheard. My ears burned. I didn't move. I just stared at my reflection in the silver tray beside the drink station, willing myself not to cry. People were laughing. Quietly, politely, awkwardly. The kind of laugh you offer when you don't want to be next. I stood just behind the hallway that led to the reception ballroom, holding a floral arrangement for the table they'd forgotten to set. My heels pinched, my stomach twisted, and no one said a word in my defense. Not my mother, who stood nearby pretending not to hear. Not my aunt, who laughed and quickly changed the subject. Not even the bridesmaids who used to follow me around as kids begging to borrow my nail polish. In that moment, I wasn't the woman who'd managed billion-dollar budgets or written policy that kept thousands safe during a state emergency. I was the quiet girl in the corner again, invisible. The familiar ache of being less than settled over my chest like fog. I thought I'd outgrown it. I thought I'd built enough of a life to outrun it. But standing there in a borrowed dress with fake gold earrings and a name no one seemed to know how to pronounce correctly, I felt like I was 16 again. I wanted to speak. I wanted to walk right up to her and say something clever, something devastating. But I just froze. You'd think by now I'd be better at this. After all, I sit in on press briefings where I speak into the governor's ear while 5 camera crews try to read my lips. I've negotiated labor deals. I've rewritten talking points for national interviews with 30 minutes notice, but family is its own battlefield, and it's the one place where my armor never quite fits right. I scanned the room, hoping for a distraction, a toast, a prayer, anything to get the attention off me and back on the bride. That's when I heard the door open. There was a shift in the air, subtle but immediate. The music didn't stop, but the volume of conversation dipped just slightly like a tide pulling back before a wave. A presence entered the room, heavy, grounded, self-assured. Then a voice, measured, warm, and unmistakable. "There you are. I don't make a move without her." Heads turned. And then I saw him, Governor Eric Langston, standing at the threshold of the ballroom in a dark, tailored suit, his signature navy tie knotted with precision. He wasn't supposed to be here. I hadn't invited him. This wasn't an event he'd ever show up to, and yet there he was, waving politely at the stunned crowd before locking eyes with me, and smiling. He walked toward me like we were the only 2 people in the room. Vanessa's mouth parted slightly like she was trying to place him but couldn't. A few of my relatives looked at each other in confusion. Someone whispered, "Is that the governor?" By the time he reached me, my cheeks were burning with something halfway between panic and disbelief. "Hope I'm not too late," he said, brushing something off his lapel. "They told me you were here. Figured I'd better show up before you handle this wedding better than the event planner." He said it with a chuckle, just loud enough for those standing nearby to hear. My lips parted, but no words came out. I was still gripping the bouquet too tightly. Then he added casually, "But with weight, I'd be lost without Rachel. She runs my office, keeps my head on straight, and probably knows more about the state budget than I do." It wasn't grandstanding. It wasn't even dramatic. It was factual. And for the first time all day, silence hit the room like a wave. The DJ had cut the music. The bartender stood still with a bottle mid-pour. Even the photographer, God bless her, lowered her camera slowly, as if afraid to make a sound. My mother stared at me, not blinking, not speaking. And Vanessa turned pale. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but nothing came out. The governor clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "You ready to sit down? I hear the chicken's decent." And just like that, he led me to the head table. If you ask my family, they'll tell you Vanessa was always the star. She won her first pageant at 5 and never stopped reminding us. She had shiny hair, long eyelashes, and that unshakable confidence you can't teach, especially in a family like ours. Every birthday party, every Thanksgiving, every Sunday dinner, Vanessa sparkled. I carried plates. I was the girl who read under the table while my cousins took selfies and performed TikToks before TikTok existed. I stayed quiet. I studied. I kept my hands folded in my lap and nodded when the adults asked, "So, what are you studying now?" What I wanted to say was public policy, political strategy, urban economic reform. But what I actually said, usually, was just finishing school. Because when you grow up around people who define worth by visibility, there's no place for quiet ambition. My mother, God love her, tried her best. She raised me alone after my father died in a warehouse accident when I was 10. She worked double shifts at the county hospital, bought my clothes from consignment shops, and always made sure there was food on the table. But she also worshipped success in the way working-class people often do, from a distance with awe and envy. So when my Aunt Vanessa's mom married a man with a Lexus and a lake house, Mom started comparing. Not out loud, not directly, but I noticed. How she'd say Vanessa's going to Florida State on a full ride for communications while reading the mail with my Pell Grant notice tucked under her arm. Or how she'd show me Facebook pictures of the cousins' cruise in Cabo while we shared chicken salad from the same Tupperware for the 3rd day in a row. None of it was cruel, just conditioning. Little signals that told me I was behind even when I was working harder than anyone else. I got my first job at 15 bagging groceries at a store where the break room reeked of burnt coffee and old mop water. By 17, I was juggling 2 part-time jobs and school. I graduated near the top of my class but went to community college because that's what we could afford. I loved policy before I had the words for it. I used to rewrite articles from The Atlantic in simpler terms just so I could understand them. I watched debates for fun. I took free online government courses late at night with one ear listening for Mom's car pulling into the driveway. I transferred to Ohio State my junior year and fell headfirst into political organizing. My first campaign job was unpaid. I made cold calls in a windowless office and handed out flyers on icy sidewalks. But I got noticed. A field director invited me to sit in on strategy calls. A state rep asked me to edit a speech. Within 2 years, I was writing policy briefs, ghostwriting op-eds, and running press operations for the governor's re-election campaign. I didn't post about it. I didn't change my last name on LinkedIn. I didn't even tell my extended family because I knew what they'd say. "Oh, so you're working in politics now, like social media or something." And I didn't have the energy to explain. Again. So I kept my head down and rose in silence. When Governor Langston offered me the role of chief of staff, I accepted it in a break room between meetings. There was no parade, no champagne. Just a quiet moment where I said yes, then went right back to drafting the emergency response plan for the opioid crisis. It was the most powerful role I'd ever held. And no one in my family even knew. I don't say that to sound noble. I say it because it became my normal. To hold power and still feel like the kid with thrift store jeans and a peanut butter sandwich tucked in her purse. To walk into the state capitol and then come home for Christmas to people who still saw me as the shy one. Vanessa. She went into real estate, married an insurance executive. They live in a 5-bedroom house with white columns out front and one of those refrigerators that talks back. She posts every detail of her life dinners, nails, vacations, her dog's Halloween costume. Each post gets hundreds of likes. Mom always makes sure I see them. "Look at her," she says. "She really made something of herself." I smile every time, and I say nothing. Because if I say I met with the Secretary of Housing today, she'll say, "Oh, that's nice." If I mention that I designed the state school safety budget, she'll say, "I think Vanessa helped install security cameras at her son's school." And if I show her my office, the one with the window that overlooks the Capitol, she'll say, "I'm just glad you have a stable job." I used to think I was being punished for not being flashy, for not needing to be seen. But I think the truth is more complicated than that. I think they didn't know how to recognize success that didn't perform for them. So, when I got that wedding invitation, white calligraphy, gold trim RSVP requested, I almost declined. I didn't want to be compared to Vanessa one more time. I didn't want to answer another round of questions like, "So are you dating anyone?" or "What exactly is it that you do again?" But I said yes, because somewhere deep down, the younger version of me still wanted to be seen. I didn't expect a grand moment, but I didn't expect what actually happened either. The governor stayed for less than an hour. He gave a quick congratulatory toast, shook a few hands, posed for one photo with the bride and groom, then slipped out as quickly and politely as he'd entered. But the aftershocks. They didn't slip out. They detonated. By the time I sat down with my second glass of ginger ale, the whispers had begun. "She runs his office like the governor. She didn't mention any of that in the family group chat. I thought she worked in data entry or something, and the one that cut deepest, because it was said with a giggle and a wine glass half full, well, she sure waited until Vanessa's day to drop that little bomb. I knew who said it before I even turned my head. Vanessa stood in the center of a group of bridesmaids' arms folded across her rhinestone belt. She was watching me like I'd just lit her veil on fire. Her tone was measured, but the venom underneath wasn't even masked. She could have said something, she added with a dramatic sigh. "I mean, if I were working for the governor, I wouldn't have kept it such a secret." The girls murmured their agreement. It would have been easy to get up and leave. Slip out the side entrance and order a car. I'd done it before at holidays, gritted my teeth through dinner, smiled through the comparisons, then made my exit the second the dishes were cleared. But I didn't move. I just sat there, back straight, feet crossed at the ankles. I let the room fill with tension, let the silence draw attention to her words, not mine. And then slowly, deliberately, I looked at Vanessa and said, "You're right." I could have said something. She blinked. I smiled, small and soft. But I didn't need to. The table fell quiet. I turned back to my plate, and that should have been it. But of course it wasn't. After the reception, when most of the guests were out on the dance floor or heading to their cars, Vanessa found me again, this time in the coat room where I was helping my mother with her shawl. She closed the door behind her and said with that same frost in her voice she used in middle school, "That was low, Rachel. Really low." I laughed once under my breath. "You're kidding." "You embarrassed me," she snapped. "You knew this was my day. I didn't even know he was coming." "Don't play innocent," she said. "You've been sitting on this for how long?" "What, trying to make me look stupid? I didn't have to try," I said before I could stop myself. Her jaw clenched. "You always had this weird little complex, always acting like you're better than the rest of us because you read more books or whatever. Now you're some political robot with a fancy title and what you think you've won." I stepped forward quietly. "I didn't come here to win anything, Vanessa. I came because I was invited. I came to support our cousin. Not to compete with you. You've always been competing," she snapped. "No," I said. "I've always been surviving." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. She blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting that. Then she scoffed, turned, and stormed out. My mother, who had watched the whole exchange in silence, picked up her purse and said softly, "You know, it wouldn't have hurt to let me know you worked for someone that important." I turned to her slowly. "You never asked." "I didn't know there was something to ask," she said, eyes flickering with something that felt like guilt, but landed more like judgment. "You've always been so private. Private doesn't mean ashamed. I didn't say it did, but that's how you act." She sighed, shifting her purse on her shoulder. "It's just surprising to find out this way. You could have told us. We could have celebrated with you. Would you have, I asked, or would you have changed the subject like you always do when something doesn't fit the version of me you're comfortable with? That silenced her. We stood there, two women with the same eyes and different wounds, not sure how to bridge the space between us. Finally, she said, "It was a nice moment." What he said. The governor. "You should be proud." I nodded. "I am." And that was it. No apology. No warmth. Just a truce made of tired words. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I danced once with the bride, hugged a few cousins, declined a slice of cake I didn't want, and smiled through compliments I didn't trust. But when I got home, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my bed in the dark, staring at my phone as texts came in. "Mom, you looked beautiful tonight." Aunt Cynthia. "I had no idea you were that Rachel Monroe. I saw your name on the news once. Proud of you." Cousin Mel. "Damn, sis, you really out here running the show? Vanessa's gonna choke on that for a week." Unknown number. "Hey, it's Tom, from the groom's side. I was wondering if you ever do private consulting." I turned off the screen and sat in the silence, because even after everything after the title, the respect, the headline moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and strangely hollow, because the truth was I had spent so long trying to protect my peace by staying silent that I'd forgotten how to speak from the center of my power. Not to gloat, not to defend, but simply to exist fully visible. I had thought staying humble meant staying hidden. That modesty meant muting the parts of me that glowed too brightly in front of others. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was another way to be. I didn't go into work the next day. At first I told myself it was just exhaustion, a long weekend, a family wedding, too many heels and not enough water. But that was a lie, and I knew it. The truth, I couldn't bring myself to walk into that building and wear the mask again. Not after what happened. Not after watching my cousin look at me like I was a thief, someone who stole a spotlight I didn't even want. Not after hearing my own mother say, "It would have been nice to know like I'd cheated her out of something instead of protecting myself from another round of polite dismissal." I spent the morning in bed with the curtains drawn, my laptop unopened. I didn't even brush my hair. I just stared at the ceiling fan, letting it spin, letting my thoughts spiral with it. Everything I had worked for, every policy drafted, every midnight memo rewritten from scratch, every emergency call answered while I was still in my pajamas, suddenly felt weightless, invisible, like a performance in a theater with no audience. What did it matter, really? The public praise was fleeting. The headlines didn't call me by name. And the people I had spent years trying to impress, my family, still didn't understand me. Worse, they didn't care to. I opened my inbox, scrolled through the flood of scheduling requests, cabinet updates, and media flags, and then shut the laptop again. I couldn't do it. Not today. I got up once to make tea, but the sound of my neighbor's kids laughing outside sent me back to bed like a punishment. Even their joy felt like noise I didn't deserve. The walls of my apartment, usually so comforting now, felt like a cage I'd designed myself. Clean lines, muted colors, everything intentional, everything controlled, except me. By late afternoon, I was still in the same spot, my phone buzzing with unanswered texts. One from the governor's assistant. He mentioned you might need a breather. Let me know if you want your schedule cleared for the week. One from my mother. Let me know when you get home safe. You left without saying goodbye. One from Vanessa. I won't forget what you did. That one stung in a different way. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so predictable. Even after all this time, she still believed I had acted with malice. She still thought my success had something to do with her. And maybe, just maybe, I had allowed her to believe that for too long. Maybe I had spent so much time shrinking myself to keep the peace that when I finally stood tall, it looked like a threat. But I didn't want to think about that yet. I didn't want to think about anything. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled a worn shoebox from the top of my closet, the one labeled Rachel, college and faded Sharpie, and sat on the floor with it in my lap. Inside were relics I hadn't touched in over a decade, a frayed campaign sticker from the first mayoral candidate I volunteered for, A signed note from my political science professor that simply read, "You ask better questions than I do." A photo of me and two other interns in matching polos, sweaty and grinning in the summer heat, and a torn page from a notebook I barely remembered writing on. In thick, looping script, it read, "I will be the voice they never see coming. I will make change even if they never say thank you. I will matter even in silence." I pressed my hand to the paper and felt the ache crawl up my throat. That version of me had been so sure, so brave in her quietness, so committed to building something real even if no one ever noticed. And now I was sitting on my apartment floor in yesterday's clothes, letting a cousin's pettiness shake the foundation I'd spent my whole life building. Why? Because I let them define me even after I outgrew their definition. I let their lack of understanding become my burden. And I realized something else, too. I had never given myself permission to own my success. Not truly, not loudly, not with the pride and clarity it deserved. I had been so afraid of being called arrogant, of being too much, that I let them treat me like I was less. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I didn't open my laptop again. I just lay on the floor, holding that scrap of notebook paper like it was sacred, and whispered out loud to no one. "You mattered, Rachel," even when no one said it. The tears came slowly, not in sobs, but in steady, quiet surrender. Not from weakness, but from release. From the letting go of years spent hoping they would see me when maybe the one who needed to see me most was me. The next morning I got up early. Not because I felt better, but because something inside me had shifted. Not like a breakthrough, more like a decision. Quiet, private, firm. I didn't do my makeup, I didn't fix my hair, but I opened my laptop and cleared my inbox one email at a time. I answered press briefings, rescheduled meetings, flagged 2 policy drafts that needed revisions, and responded to a staffer's urgent question about the housing bill. And then I did something I'd never done before. I opened a blank document, typed the words "Leadership Session Women of Color" in policy at the top, and started building a framework for a mentorship program I had dreamt about for years but never dared to pursue. By lunchtime, it was outlined. By dinner time, it was a formal proposal with budget needs, a projected timeline, and a draft message to the governor. I sent it to him without hesitation. His reply came within an hour. "Do it. Tell me what you need. And thank you for doing what I should have asked you to do months ago." I stared at the screen for a long time after that, because for the first time I wasn't waiting for permission. I was simply acting from power, not from fear. That night, I also replied to my mother's message. It was short, "I'm home. I left early because I needed air. I'm okay. And I hope you know, I'm still your daughter whether you understand what I do or not." She didn't respond immediately, and that was okay. I wasn't writing to convince her anymore. I was writing to tell myself that I didn't need her approval to be whole. 3 days later, I stood behind a podium in a lecture hall at my alma mater giving a guest lecture on state governance. It was a last-minute invitation someone had canceled, and a friend of a professor knew I might be available. I almost said no. But then I remembered that version of me, 17, sitting in that same auditorium with a hand-me-down laptop and a peanut butter sandwich in her purse, wondering if someone like her could ever really belong in a room like that. I owed her this. I started the speech softly, nervously even, but as I watched those students sit up, lean in, and take notes, not because of my title, but because I had something real to say, I found a rhythm. I told them about starting in field offices, about making copies, about learning to write policy by reading it over someone else's shoulder. I told them about staying up late on budget nights, going to sleep with numbers in my head, and waking up with talking points on my tongue. And then I told them the truth. I said, "You don't have to shout to be powerful. You don't have to be loud to be heard, but you do have to speak, even if your voice shakes, even if they don't want to listen, even if it makes the people who raised you uncomfortable. Say it anyway, because the world will never know what you carry if you keep handing them silence." After the lecture, 3 young women came up to me, 2 black, 1 Latina, and said they'd never seen someone like them in this field before. Not in real life, not up close. One asked if I had a mentorship program. I smiled. I'm building one right now. When I got home, I sent the updated proposal to our communications director and asked her to prep a press release. She said, "You sure you want your name on this?" I said, "Yes." I'm done hiding. That week, something else happened too. Vanessa's husband, Mark, reached out. Through a back channel, of course. A friend of a friend. He was trying to close a real estate deal that had hit a zoning snag. Apparently, someone had suggested he reach out to the governor's right hand. That was me. The message was polite, respectful, vaguely urgent. I didn't even hesitate. I called him directly, not to scold, not to retaliate, but to say clearly I don't mix family with official business. I hope you understand. He was quiet for a moment, then muttered, "Yeah, sure. I get it. It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary, and it felt good." A few days later, Vanessa posted a cryptic status on Facebook about snakes in disguise and people who let power go to their heads. I didn't respond. I didn't even roll my eyes. Because for the first time, I understood something: her opinion didn't hold value unless I handed it to her. And I wasn't handing her anything anymore. That Friday, the governor mentioned me by name in a press conference. He thanked me for spearheading the mentorship initiative and said, "Some of the best leadership comes from people who don't seek attention but deserve it anyway." I watched it alone from my office. No applause, no confetti, just a quiet moment where I finally felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride, not relief, peace. Because I wasn't fighting anymore, not with my family, not with Vanessa, not even with myself. I was simply standing, fully, publicly, unapologetically, exactly where I was meant to be. The invitation came in a pale blue envelope. Same script, same gold leaf edges, same wedding planner probably. This time, it was my cousin Mel, Vanessa's younger sister, who was getting married. A spring ceremony at a vineyard an hour outside Columbus. I read the card 3 times before setting it down on my desk. I knew what it meant. It was a test, a peace offering, a provocation, or all 3. The last time I showed up at a family wedding, I ruined Vanessa's spotlight just by being seen. Now a second opportunity to be visible had arrived, but this time I had a choice not about whether I would attend, but about how I would show up. The old version of me, the one who played small to keep the room comfortable, would have RSVP'd, quietly worn a neutral dress, stayed in the back row, and left early. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I called Mel personally. "I got the invite," I said, "and I'd love to be there." Her voice lit up. "Good. I wanted you to come. Actually, I kind of hoped you'd say yes so I could ask you something." She hesitated. "Then, would you give a toast?" There was silence on the line for 3 long seconds. Then I smiled. Yes, I'd be honored. The day of the wedding, I arrived 15 minutes early, not to help set tables, but simply to breathe in the moment. To take my seat, not shrink into it. I wore a steel blue wrap dress, understated but sharp, hair curled soft around my face. Minimal jewelry, no armor, no hiding, just me. When I walked into the reception hall, a few heads turned, a few more whispered, but unlike last time, I didn't flinch. I nodded to those who made eye contact. I smiled when Mel's mother waved me over. I hugged the bride, laughed at the awkward groomsmen jokes, and found my name at a table near the front, not the overflow table by the speaker. And when the time came, I stood, tapped my glass lightly, and lifted my note cards. "Good evening," I began. "I'm Rachel Monroe. Some of you know me as Mel's cousin. Some of you may remember me as the quiet one who never spoke unless it was to refill a glass or carry a chair. A few laughs, tense but genuine. But I want to take a moment to speak not as someone who works in government or sits behind important desks, but as someone who knows what it's like to be underestimated." Now the room was still. I looked around, pausing on familiar faces. My mother, my aunt, even Vanessa sitting 2 tables away, back straight and unreadable. I continued. "In families like ours, it's easy to label people. One's the pretty one, one's the smart one, one's the loud one, one's the helper. We build boxes around each other without realizing how hard they are to escape." More silence, but Mel. I turned toward the bride. Mel was one of the few people who never put me in a box. Even when we were kids, she asked me what I thought, not just what I could do. And I've never forgotten that. Mel's eyes shimmered. She mouthed, "Thank you." I smiled. And so I raise a glass not just to Mel and her new husband, but to the version of family that listens. The version that sees us fully and makes room for us to grow. A few claps, then more. Then a swell of applause that actually startled me. I stepped down, folded my cards, and returned to my seat. I didn't look toward Vanessa. I didn't need to, because this moment wasn't about her. It was about claiming the space that had always been mine. Later that evening, I stepped outside for air. The vineyard was quiet now, lit by string lights and soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. I sipped ginger ale from a champagne flute and looked up at the stars. Then I heard the door creak behind me. Footsteps. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Vanessa. She stood beside me in silence for a long moment, arms crossed loosely, expression unreadable. Then, without looking at me, she said, "That was a nice toast." "Thanks," I said softly. Another pause. Then, almost grudgingly, "You look happy." I turned to her now. "I am." She nodded. "I wasn't trying to be cruel. That night, I didn't realize you'd changed so much." "I didn't," I said. "I just stopped hiding." She winced. Was I really that bad? I looked at her not with anger, but with something closer to compassion. "You were who you needed to be," I said. "But so was I. We just didn't know how to see each other without feeling threatened." She nodded slowly. "I was jealous," she said finally. "You didn't need the spotlight. And you still got further than any of us." I let that sit between us. Then I said, "We're not in a race, Vanessa. We never were." She gave a small laugh. "Try telling that to our mothers." We both laughed then, a little sadly. She reached for the door handle. "I should get back inside." "Yeah," I said. "Me too." She turned halfway. "Hey, I hope you keep doing whatever it is you're doing. It looks good on you." I nodded. "Thanks." She disappeared into the glow of the reception hall, and I stood in the quiet for a moment longer. Not because I needed air this time, but because I wanted to feel it. All of it. The forgiveness, the stillness, the release. 2 weeks after Mel's wedding, I sat across from a room full of young women, 22 interns, all from underserved communities across Ohio, most of them first-generation college students. Many of them looked like me when I started uncertain, undercredited, and underestimated. They were here because of the initiative I'd pitched just months earlier, the Quiet Power Fellowship, a summer program designed to mentor women of color entering government policy and public service. And today was orientation. They didn't know this was personal, that each time I stood in front of them, I was rewriting the story I had once lived in silence. I looked around the room, eyes wide, pens ready, and cleared my throat. "My name is Rachel Monroe," I began. "I'm the Chief of Staff to the Governor of Ohio." But I didn't come here to talk about my title. They straightened in their seats, listening closer. "I came here to tell you that being overlooked does not mean you're not powerful. It just means your power hasn't made people comfortable yet, and that's not your job." Some of them smiled, some of them blinked fast like they were trying not to cry. I told them about my first political campaign making cold calls from a basement with a space heater and bad cell service. I told them about being told I lacked presence because I wasn't loud and wasn't leadership material because I didn't talk over people. And then I told them about being the last voice in the governor's ear before a state address, about pushing legislation that changed lives, about learning to lead with precision, not performance. And finally I said, "You do not need permission to exist fully. You do not need to shrink to fit someone else's comfort zone. You are allowed to be brilliant and visible and unbothered." The room was quiet. Then the clapping started. Not wild, not theatrical, just strong. Like them. Afterward, a girl named Nia came up to me, tiny, serious with oversized glasses and a stack of questions. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "How did you not give up when nobody believed in you?" I thought about it, about the shoebox in my closet, the silent drives home from holidays, the countless times I smiled through being dismissed. "I believed in myself," I said, quietly at first, then fiercely, and eventually loudly enough that I didn't need anyone else's belief to carry me. She nodded like she was tucking the words away for later. As she walked off, I felt it in my chest again. That old ache. That familiar tug of the girl I used to be watching from the sidelines, waiting for someone to say she was enough. But now, I didn't wait. That evening, I got a text from my mother. "Your aunt sent me the article. They published your photo next to the governor's quote. I printed a copy for the fridge." I stared at it for a long moment. She didn't say "I'm proud of you," but I didn't need her to anymore. I typed back, "Thanks, Mom. I'll bring you the full article next week." And I meant it, because even if the recognition came late, it still came. And more importantly, I wasn't living for it anymore. That weekend, I went through my old family photo albums. There was one I hadn't seen in years, me at 10 holding a handmade sign that said "I want to help people." My father had snapped the picture outside our apartment before his last shift at the warehouse. He had circled the word "help" in red pen. I placed the photo in a new frame on my desk. It reminded me who I was before the titles, before the silence, before the shrinking. A month later, I was invited to speak at the State Women in Leadership Conference. As I took the stage, I noticed Vanessa in the audience, arms folded, lips neutral. She had come with her office. A new role in county economic development, apparently. We hadn't spoken since the wedding. I nodded to her as I passed. She nodded back, and that was enough. My speech that day ended like this. Let them mock your silence. Let them question your worth. Let them whisper behind your back at weddings or boardrooms or living rooms. And then, let your work answer. I paused, breathed in. Because one day the same people who dismissed you will be the ones clearing their throats when someone says your name. And by then, you won't even need the applause, because you'll already know you belonged all along. The room erupted, and I stood there, not overwhelmed or weeping or waiting, just steady, rooted, whole. These days, I still get asked, "How did the governor end up at your cousin's wedding?" The truth, he heard me mention it in passing and knew somehow that I needed to be seen. That's what real leaders do. They see what others miss. And sometimes they remind us of the truth we've buried too deep to speak. But now, I don't wait for anyone else to say it. I say it myself. Every time I stand up. Every time I speak. Every time I meet a young woman who thinks she has to stay small to survive. I look her in the eye and say, "You don't. Not anymore."